Welcome back to the Future of Data Storage, sponsored by Jeskel on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Fornicola, and my guest is Russell Schneider. He is the director of the storage systems practice for Jeskel. Russ, before the break, we were talking about the role of tape and how it fits into federal agencies. Talk to me a little bit more about where you were going with that.
Well, tape is a difficult challenge for most agencies. And the reason is it requires a lot of infrastructure, tape libraries, a lot of touch and handling by operations people. It raises security concerns because when you make backup copies of data, by definition, that data is going to be in transit or in motion. It's handed to unknown and unsecured parties who put it in trucks and drive it someplace, and it gets stored someplace off-site. So obviously, it has a lot of concerns associated with it. It also takes a long time to get data back from that tape. So what can we do to address that problem? And the answer is, as we're undergoing this transition to private cloud for backup, there's an intermediate step that agencies can look at. And that is to become operationally tapeless without having to change their processes. And we do that by replacing the tape systems and migrating them over to virtual tape systems. And this applies to users and agencies that are relying on both mainframe type of computer installations and on open systems as well. And we do that by using nearline disks, which is a hot and growing segment of the hard disk industry today. Nearline disks have gone from 1 terabyte to 2 terabyte to 4 terabyte, and today we're delivering 8 terabyte drives in arrays. And so we can now contain on disk the total amount of data that most users used to put on tape. And we do that by putting a software layer over the top of the disk that mimics and virtualizes the disk and makes it look like it's a tape system to the agency's hosts and computers. And so by doing that, none of the processes have to change. It still looks like your mainframe or your Unix or Linux servers or your VMware servers. It still looks like they have a tape system back there, but really they've got a single rack with one of these virtual systems with some nearline disk. And there's a further advantage that falls out of that. Once I have the data on disk, I can hook it up to that agency's private network. We can put another rack at a secure location. Most of these agencies have multiple locations. And over their network, we can now create a replica of those virtual volumes. And the data therefore becomes geodispersed in multiple risk regions. It stays available when it's needed, okay? And in the event of recovery, we don't have to start bringing tapes back to a site from some off-site location and loading them in before we can begin the recovery. The data is already sitting there on disk, ready to begin the recovery the minute that the personnel walk in the door at the recovery location.
So certainly, tape plays a role. One of the things that I would like to transition to is this idea of security and encryption, which we can't finish our conversation without talking about the security piece because it is on the top of minds of all the federal IT managers. Talk to me about what CISOs can do to address the security problem they might be facing.
Well, the security problem is based on encryption, and encryption can take place at many different levels. It can be instilled at the host level or the server level, meaning as the data is actually born or created, it's encrypted at the server. In the storage industry, we can encrypt the data at the physical disk level, or as we are now doing, we are encrypting it at the software-defined storage layer, and that's the optimum and ideal place to do it, because there's a second side to that security and encryption coin. And that second side is it is not only enough to be able to secure and encrypt that data to a standard like AES 256 initially, but we have to be able to securely erase that data when it's no longer needed. And in the past, just to erase 10, 15, 20 terabytes of data with a 3 times overwrite, which is what the National Institute of Standards required as a minimum, could take as much as 2 to 3 days to secure that data when it was no longer needed. So today, when we encrypt that data at the logical volume level, and we do it in the software-defined layer, we can walk up like it's a balloon, and we can stick a pin in those volumes, and we shred the key that provides access to that data, and within an instantaneous amount of time, we are able to delete that data. So why do customers need to worry about deleting the data? Well, it's very simple. Everybody has test data. Everybody has copies of the data. Everybody goes for DR tests. They're required to do so. Everybody has multiple locations with data being sent back and forth. Okay, and imagine everybody's social security numbers, names, addresses, and other private information on citizens sitting in volumes on data records, okay, that are left at a location and now they're not needed anymore. What are we going to do about that? And the answer is the software-defined layer is now making it possible to not only encrypt the data on a volume-by-volume basis, but to immediately delete it. And by the way, 18 months ago, NIST did a further study and determined that cryptographic erasure, which is what I've just described, that's what that technique is called, okay, is equally as effective as a 3-time DoD 5220-22M overwrite, which was the standard.
Russ, we have about 30 seconds left. If you can, in that 30 seconds, paint me a picture of what the future of data storage looks like.
The future of data storage looks like the agencies are going to have software-defined storage layers just like they have software-defined server layers. We're just 5 years behind the server guys. They are not going to have to change storage systems every 3 years like they've done in the past. They're not going to have to migrate the data. They will keep the software-defined storage layer up to date, and they will never have to, they will always have the current product. They will never have an obsolete product because the functionality that they have will be in that software-defined storage layer, and if they have the current software, they have the current product. And the underlying commodity x86 storage servers will come and go concurrently with the systems staying online, and they will always have the latest hardware and they will always have the latest product with no rip and replace.
A good place to stop. We could go on, but thank you so much for your time today, Russ. It was great to speak with you. I'd like to thank my guest today, Russell Schneider. He is the Director of the Storage Systems Practice for Jeskel. I'm your host, Jason Fornicola, and you're listening to federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com and search Jeskel.